My daughter begged me not to come for Christmas. "Dad, please stay home," Emily whispered on the phone. I asked her what was wrong, but she started crying and said, "If you love me, don't come here." Then the call ended. I sat there staring at my phone, feeling the same fear I had felt the night her mother died. A father's heart knows when his child is hiding pain. So I drove to Emily's house anyway. When I arrived, Christmas music was playing, cars filled the driveway, and her husband's family was laughing inside. But Emily was nowhere in sight. I walked around the house and heard something behind the garage door. I opened it and froze. My daughter was locked inside, her hands tied, tears running down her face. Upstairs, her husband's family was celebrating Christmas like nothing was happening. The images in this video are imaginative visual recreations made only to represent the story, not real photographs of the people or events. If you enjoy emotional family stories with shocking secrets and powerful justice, subscribe to Behind Dad. Because what I discovered that Christmas night was something I never could have imagined. My name is Robert, and Emily was my only daughter. After her mother died, she became the center of my world. I watched her grow from a quiet little girl into a strong woman who always tried to solve her problems alone. That was one thing I loved about her. It was also the thing that worried me most. Emily married Jason 3 years ago. At first, he seemed like a good man. His parents, Richard and Linda, were wealthy, polite, and always smiling, but their kindness felt different whenever money came up. They asked questions about Emily's house. They asked about my property. They even joked about what would happen when I was gone. I never forgot those jokes. Then Emily started changing. She stopped visiting me. She stopped answering calls. Whenever I asked why, she said Jason was stressed. I knew she wasn't telling me everything. Then came that Christmas phone call. "Dad, don't come." I couldn't ignore the fear in her voice. When I arrived at her house, I saw Richard and Linda through the dining room window, laughing with Jason and raising champagne glasses. I wondered how they could celebrate while Emily was missing. Then I heard a faint banging sound from the garage. I opened the door. Emily looked at me. "Dad," she whispered, "you weren't supposed to find me." I rushed toward her. "Who did this?" She looked toward the house. Then she whispered 4 words. "Jason knows about Mom." I froze when Emily mentioned her mother. "What does Jason know about your mom?" I asked. She shook her head and started crying. I untied her hands and helped her stand, but she grabbed my arm before we could leave. "Dad, you don't understand. They found something Mom hid." I felt my chest tighten. My wife, Susan, had been gone for 6 years. As far as I knew, she had never left anything behind except memories, photographs, and the jewelry she loved. Emily told me Jason had discovered an old box in the attic. Inside were letters, bank records, and a photograph of my wife standing beside a man I didn't recognize. Richard and Linda had seen the box. That's when their behavior changed. They started demanding that Emily give them access to my family property. When she refused, they threatened her. I asked why my wife's old papers mattered so much. Emily looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Because Mom knew what they were doing." My stomach dropped. She explained that Susan had discovered Richard and Linda were secretly moving money through several family businesses. She had gathered evidence but never told me because she feared they would retaliate. Then Susan disappeared from the family business. I had always believed she simply wanted a quiet life. Now I realized there was another reason. Emily reached beneath a blanket and pulled out a small metal box. "Mom gave this to me before she died." I stared at it. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because she made me promise." Inside was a handwritten letter. I opened it. Susan had written, "Robert, if they ever come looking for this, do not trust anyone who asks you to sign anything." My hands began shaking. Then I found a second page. It contained my father's name. And underneath it was the address of an old storage property I had never heard about. Emily whispered, "That's where they think the rest of the evidence is." Before I could respond, we heard the garage door moving. Someone was coming. I pulled Emily behind me. The door opened slowly. Jason stood there. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked directly at me and said, "You should have stayed home, Dad." Then he locked the garage door behind him. Jason stood between us and the garage door, and for the first time I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Fear, not anger, fear. He looked at Emily and said, "You were never supposed to tell him about the box." I stepped forward and told him to move. He refused. Then a voice came from behind him. "Jason, what are you doing?" It was Linda. She looked at me, then at Emily, and suddenly her face changed. She whispered, "Robert, you need to leave." I asked why. She didn't answer. Instead, she walked toward me and quietly slipped a key into my hand. Your wife hid the truth because she knew what they were capable of. Jason shouted at his mother, but Linda ignored him. She told me the storage property belonged to Susan. Richard had been searching for it for years because the documents inside could expose their financial crimes. I looked at Emily. She nodded. Now everything made sense. The Christmas gathering wasn't a celebration. It was a trap. They wanted Emily to sign papers transferring control of my family's property before they could reach the evidence. Then I heard a loud knock at the front door. Linda whispered, "That's Richard." The garage door opened. Richard stormed inside with 2 men. He looked at me and laughed. "You really should have listened to your daughter." I told him the police were already on their way. He laughed again. "You didn't call them?" I smiled. "Yes, I did." His expression changed. I had quietly activated the emergency call on my phone before confronting Jason. The 2 men tried to leave, but officers entered through the front door. Richard started shouting that I had no evidence. Then Linda stepped forward. "I do." She handed the police a folder. Inside were years of financial records, forged signatures, secret payments, and copies of documents showing how Richard had been planning to take control of Emily's property. Jason stared at his mother in disbelief. "You betrayed us." Linda shook her head. "No, I finally stopped betraying myself." The police arrested Richard and the 2 men. Jason was taken in for questioning, but before he left, he looked at Emily. "I never wanted to hurt you." Emily wiped her tears. "You knew exactly what you were doing." Then he was gone. That night, Emily and I drove to the storage property. We opened the door with Linda's key. Inside was an old wooden chest. On top was a note in my wife's handwriting. It said, "Robert, if you finally found this, forgive me for keeping the truth from you." I opened the chest. And inside was the secret that changed everything. Inside the chest were dozens of old documents, photographs, bank records, and a small cassette recorder. My hands shook as I picked up the recorder because I recognized Susan's voice before I even pressed play. "If you're hearing this, Robert, then the truth has finally found you." I closed my eyes. For 6 years, I had missed that voice more than I could explain. Susan said she had discovered that Richard and Linda had been secretly moving money from family accounts and using fake contracts to take control of properties. She had collected evidence because she knew one day they might target Emily. Then came the part that broke me. Susan had known she was seriously ill. She had hidden the truth because she didn't want her final months to be filled with fear and legal battles. But she had prepared everything. The property we thought belonged to me was actually protected under a family trust. Emily was the rightful beneficiary. Richard and Linda could never legally take it. Susan had also left evidence proving that Jason had helped his parents manipulate Emily. I sat on the floor holding the recorder, tears running down my face. Emily sat beside me. "Mom was protecting us the whole time," she whispered. I nodded. "She was." The investigation lasted months. Richard and Linda were charged after investigators uncovered their financial scheme. The forged documents were traced back to their office, and the evidence Susan had preserved became the key to the case. Jason eventually admitted what he had done. Emily filed for divorce. It was painful, but she finally began rebuilding her life, and I stayed beside her. A few months later, Emily invited me to her new home for Christmas. There were no expensive decorations, no fake smiles, no dangerous secrets, just a small tree, warm lights, and a simple dinner. Before we ate, Emily placed a framed photograph of Susan on the table. "She should be here," Emily said. I looked at the picture and smiled through my tears. "She is." Emily held my hand. "Dad, you saved me." I shook my head. "No, your mother did." That Christmas taught me something I will never forget. Revenge isn't always about making someone suffer. Sometimes revenge is surviving what they tried to destroy. Sometimes it's exposing the truth. And sometimes it's simply protecting the person you love and refusing to let evil decide how their story ends. If you were in my position, would you have ignored your daughter's warning and gone anyway? Tell me in the comments. And if this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to remember that family should never be built on fear, money, or control. The biggest lesson I learned is simple. Never ignore the quiet signs that someone you love is hurting. Because behind one short message, one tearful phone call, or one whispered warning, there may be a person desperately hoping someone will come looking for them. I did, and I would do it again, because I'm a father. And when your child needs you, you don't wait for permission, you show up.